We will be now moving to the second question. This will be addressed to Ken Robinson first. Laveen is now home to 2 districts. What attributes do you possess that will convince Laveen residents that you have what it takes to work with District 7 to represent the community, specifically when it concerns zoning and the general plan?
Well, the general plan and the village system are great. So is the district system. It means that all of our individual needs can be met. But I think the attribute that I can bring to the table more than anyone is, look, I'm fighting for my family and I'm fighting for the neighborhoods that I care about. So we can talk about economic development, we can talk about attending meetings, but I'm talking about protecting the place where people I love live. And we need to be conscious that Laveen is great because it provides low density. We've got horse property next to sprawling homes, next to subdivisions that are all great places to live. But you know what? Maryvale was a great place to live when they developed it. But what happened is that we didn't invest as a city, and we didn't invest in long-term strategic visioning to actually say, how do we protect the charm and the distinct character of that neighborhood? That's what we need to look at here in the district system. I differ with my opponents in a few ways, and my opponent, Ms. Gallego, wants to develop all of our city land or sell within 7 years. I think doing that, city-owned land here in Laveen, would take away from that charm, and it would take away from that character of our neighborhoods. I think that the way you work with other people is you really ask the neighborhoods what they want. That's the difference that I bring to the table. So when the students are out knocking on doors for me, or when my mom's going into her neighborhoods here in Laveen, she knows the interest of the neighborhoods. And I know the interest of the neighborhoods. I want to make sure that I have somewhere to take my family more than just a native New Yorker, right? I want to make sure that we've got other amenities down here. And what that happens to do is it makes you more aware of how to protect those neighborhoods. And that's the difference between me and the other opponents in this race. I want to make sure that we fund all of the attributes and all of the city services that will keep Laveen distinct. I don't think one size fits all. I think the size of protecting Laveen means that we keep it down density and we don't allow the economic development to overtake the character of our neighborhoods.
Thank you, candidate Robinson. Next will be candidate Rodriguez.
Well, I think working together with District 7 is always important, but more importantly, I think within that cooperation, we need to work with the people that live here. I always talk about private property rights. And I think that we have to be very careful about what the city does and how it does it through zoning, through other ordinances, to make sure that people that own property can do what they want with their property. Mr. Robinson's right, there's a lot of different styles of property here. There's horse property, there's farms, there's open acreage, there's vast homes on a lot of acreage. And what you don't want to do is try to create where you squeeze those kind of people out that have lived there for years and years. And property rights is number one amongst those things that protects people from government. Zoning, all these ordinances, those things will start to slowly but surely impinge on people's freedom to do what they want with their property. And I want to protect those rights. If you would like to have 2 years ago, there was a man that did 60 days in county jail because he had a Bible study in his house. That was a Phoenix City ordinance that put him there. It wasn't a state. It wasn't a federal ordinance. It was a city ordinance. And the city did that to him. That goes to the very function of our Constitution, the freedom to exercise our religion. And it was on his property, on his private property. And so those are the things we have to look at. We have to go out and we have to talk to people. We can have all the committees we want, but that's not people, that's a committee. And they don't live here. And they aren't a part of this community. And I think it's important to talk to people in the community first and foremost and see what their concerns are. And then use those concerns to implement policy.
Thank you, candidate Rodriguez. Next, candidate Stewart, please.
If I was elected to be the city councilman for District 8, one of the first meetings I would have would be with Councilman Michael Nowakowski, who was formerly my city council person, because up until January 1, my family and I were in District 7. He was our council person. So since Laveen encompasses both District 8 and District 7, it would be vitally important for us as the 2 council persons representing you to be together and to see how we can find out the needs, specific needs that you have in both sections, well, not sections of Laveen, in the parts of Laveen that have been divided, and how we can work together to keep a sense of community. I live just east of the border near Olney and 24th Avenue, so and in the mornings I walk, and I walk in Laveen quite a bit. I walk 5 miles a day. I try to. My wife and I shop at 51st Street and Baseline, so this is my neighborhood, and I would like to be a part of finding out the specific needs that you feel Laveen has, and then in partnership with Councilman Nowakowski and the city manager, all the appropriate departments, how can we meet the needs, and how can I serve as your voice, as your representative, to make sure that the very uniqueness of Laveen remains captured and your needs are met to become a better community.
Thank you, candidate Stewart. So we'll be moving on to the next question. This will be addressed. Oh, sorry. Excuse me. Sorry, candidate Gallego.
Thank you. So in addition to bringing the office to Laveen and working that closely with Councilman Nowakowski, we've been talking about a lot of other areas where we can collaborate. And he said he really appreciates some of my background, which is very different from his own. So, for example, air quality is a major interest of mine, and the mulch fires have been very concerning, and I have an environmental degree and understand some of the solutions and that needs to be a priority. And so we'll have a good partnership because that's not his background. Also on economic development, I understand what brings businesses like the hospital and medical services to the area. And Councilman Nowakowski has said again, that's something where he really looks forward to partnering with me. The question spoke about the general plan, which is a great interest of mine. I'm one of the 2 leaders of the general plan for Phoenix and have really tried to make sure that we step back and think about the investments we need to have. So Lawrence spoke about wanting to incentivize more grocery stores. I'm not sure what he meant by that, but if it's more commercial zoning, that's not something I think we need in Laveen right now. There's a lot of vacant commercial property, and so my priorities would be different. One of the things that the general plan does do best, though, is protect low-density housing, including some of the very special areas in Laveen. And I've been a longtime advocate for open space and for parks. I was one of the few candidates up here who voted in the election for the Parks and Preserve Initiative. And I think you need someone who has that long-term involvement in the city and who was involved in these things before running and voted in those elections and advocated and cared about these issues before I began the campaign.
Thank you, candidate Gallego. I have to apologize for skipping you earlier. Okay, now we're ready to move on to the next question. This will be addressed to candidate Rodriguez. Laveen has had its share of criminal activity. We have thefts, burglaries, and fatalities. Most recently, a publicized purse snatching in the Safeway parking lot during daytime. What are your plans to help ensure safety to residents in Laveen and allocating the much-needed resources to Estrella Mountain Precinct?
Well, obviously that should be the #1 priority. As I said before, the city supposedly addressed this concern with the food tax and did nothing with that money. So over the course of since 2008 or so, 350 police officers are no longer on the force and weren't replaced except for 11 2 weeks ago. So ostensibly we have the budget and have had the budget because we haven't been spending money on 350 police officers for those police officers to be replaced. And probably, since most of them retired, at a much lower rate because they started at a much lower salary. So I don't see why the money's not there. I don't understand how the city can say, we don't have money for police and fire. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's your money, it's your tax money. They've been taking it since 2010, $148 million. They've done nothing with it, nothing. Now, the 11 police officers, they said they hired 11 police officers. Technically, they already worked for the city. They were all volunteers. And they were employees of the city under a volunteer status. Now, there's reports about low morale in the police department. Well, if they're working as much overtime as I would imagine they're working, it's no wonder. So that would be the number one thing to do, is to get more police officers on the streets. Because since 2007, 2008, they've been slowly but surely decreasing how many there are on the streets. And so we need to get them back on the streets, we need to get them in the academy, and get them on the streets as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Candidate Rodriguez. Candidate Stewart.
Every resident of District 8 and the entire city deserves a protected, safe, and clean environment. So that is extremely important. So as the economy has begun to get better, as our city manager and those who work under him continue to be good stewards of our resources through cost management, efficiency, and innovation, they were able to save $59 million to get the city out of the red a couple of years ago. I believe that we'll be able to add more police officers. Something I found out, which I did not know in attending a block watch committee in South Mountain Village not too long ago, the community police officer was there, and the people were saying, why aren't there more police officers here? Why does it take so long for the police to respond? And he said something that really shocked me, but he said, you need to call the police more. You need to call the non-emergency number more, because police are assigned to districts in the city and divisions in the city based on the number of calls they get from the residents. And he said the reason why there are often more police officers in North Phoenix, where crime is lower than here and in other parts of District 8, is because the people call more. Well, I would make it my business to communicate to all of the residents here in Levine and everywhere else, what if the dog barks too loud? No, call the police, call the non-emergency, in order that you can let them know you are interested, you believe that they will come, and that they will respond to your calls. Because if that's the way they allocate police officers, you need to call more to let them know you need their presence.
Thank you, Candidate Stewart. Candidate Gallego.
As I go door to door and talk to neighbors, it's so frustrating how often when you ring someone's doorbell, they're afraid to answer because they've recently been burglarized. One of my good friends just came home from vacation to find her car missing from the garage, and I hear a lot of stories of crime, including crimes that are much more violent than theft, from District 8 residents, so that's very frustrating. And Pastor Stewart is right, that the system for relying on complaints has hurt District 8. We don't get our fair share of police because we aren't the best complainers. And I know I've spoken to a few of you in this room who are good complainers, and thank you, keep up the good work. But overall, the police officers repeatedly say, we aren't getting our fair share because there's some guy in North Phoenix who will call every time someone's speeding too quickly on his street. So I'd like to change the way we allocate police officers so that it's less dependent on complaints and more on outcomes. I think that's very important. This is something wanting more police is something I've become known for. Three of us were in the editorial board meeting today, and one of the questions the editorial board asked me was, Kate, you're known for wanting more police officers. And we do have to talk about how to fund that. So I wanted to clarify what Lauren said about that I want to sell all the vacant land in Levine. What I've proposed is that the city of Phoenix owns an enormous amount of vacant land, much of which is not in Levine, including projects that it's bought to deal with blight and then bulldozed commercial buildings, or in certain neighborhoods, bulldozed homes. This is more of a problem in the eastern portion of District 8, but there's also plenty of lots in downtown Phoenix that the city owns, some of which it has great plans for and funding for, and some of which we really need to sit down and say, can we identify funding sources? And what I've said is, if we don't have a plan for something and a funding source, then we need to sell that land and spend the money on more important things like public safety.
Thank you, Candidate Gallego. Next, Candidate Robinson.
Well, thank you very much. We talk about public safety, but we don't talk about how to fund it. I'm actually the only candidate who's called to restore the public funding that will hire these police officers. Now, I do believe and what Mr. Rodriguez said. I think we need to get to the bottom of why we don't spend more dollars on police and fire protection. But as the only candidate calling for restoration of the funding to do so, I think it's disingenuous to say we're for police and not talk about the mechanism to fund it. Now, we can sell our city land, and the plan that Ms. Gallego is talking about is saying within 7 years. Now, selling all of our city land to fund our public safety is like mortgaging your house to fund your utility bill. I just don't think it's sustainable. I don't think it's business savvy, and I don't think it's a long-term solution. Now, what I do say is restore that funding. That's number one. Number two, we've got stronger mechanisms coming into place from the state capitol. A bill just passed to actually take on the copper and metal theft issue. The forum that we convened at the Padilla Academy brought together industry leaders, law enforcement officers, and neighborhood HOA leaders. And those protections that are going to be put in place to prevent copper and metal theft can also be put in place for a lot of the other issues we're talking about. Because the issues we have in Laveen, I think, are primarily property crimes. And those property crimes are due in large part to the economic downturn, but they're also due in large part to us not having the funding mechanisms, the sustainable funding mechanisms to actually fund our public safety. It's a concern, and it would be my first priority, is to how do we restore that funding to make sure that our neighborhoods, our kids, our families, and yes, our property are safe.
Thank you, Candidate Robinson.